When 12-year-old Emma Blake saw the man at table 6 begin clutching his throat, her first instinct was to look around for an adult to help. But the volunteer servers at St. Catherine's Orphanage were busy with other tables, and the man's face was turning blue with alarming speed. Emma had seen enough medical emergencies during her 7 years at the orphanage to recognize when someone was dying. The man was huge, well over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and arms covered in tattoos that told stories Emma couldn't read. His leather vest bore patches she didn't understand, but his desperate eyes were universal language for someone who needed help immediately. "Sir," Emma said, approaching his table with the careful directness she'd learned from dealing with crisis situations. "Are you choking?" The man nodded frantically, pointing to his throat, while making sounds that confirmed Emma's assessment. Around them, the orphanage's monthly community dinner continued, volunteers serving donated food to anyone who needed a meal, conversations flowing between families, elderly residents, and the handful of children from St. Catherine's who were old enough to participate. Emma had learned the Heimlich maneuver 3 years earlier, when Mrs. Peterson, the orphanage nurse, had insisted that all children over 8 should know basic first aid. "You never know when you might be the only person available to help someone," Mrs. Peterson had said during the training session that most kids had treated as boring obligation. "Stand up," Emma instructed, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to emergency situations. "I'm going to help you." The man looked down at Emma with an expression that mixed desperation with skepticism. She was small even for 12, barely reaching his chest when he stood, but something in her confident manner convinced him to cooperate. Emma positioned herself behind the man, wrapping her arms around his massive frame and finding the correct placement for the Heimlich maneuver. It took all her strength to apply enough pressure, and for a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the man's breathing cleared with a violent cough that expelled whatever had been blocking his airway. If you love forbidden love stories, subscribe and stay for the next one. "Are you okay?" Emma asked as the man caught his breath, drawing the attention of nearby diners who were just beginning to realize what had happened. "You saved my life," the man said, his voice rough from the ordeal. He looked down at Emma with an expression of amazement that had nothing to do with her size, and everything to do with her courage. "What's your name, little angel?" "Emma Blake. I live here at St. Catherine's." "I'm Jake Morrison, and I owe you more than I can ever repay." The commotion had drawn Sister Mary Catherine, the orphanage director, who approached with the protective concern she reserved for situations involving her children and strangers she couldn't immediately assess. "Emma, what happened here?" Sister Mary Catherine asked, her eyes taking in Jake's leather vest and tattoos, with the wariness of someone who'd learned to be cautious about the adults who entered her children's lives. "The man was choking, sister. Emma performed the Heimlich maneuver and saved his life," explained Dr. Rodriguez, a volunteer physician who'd witnessed the incident. She acted with remarkable composure for someone her age. Sister Mary Catherine's expression softened as she processed what had occurred. "Emma, you did well. Mr. Morrison. Jake Morrison. Sister, your young lady here has skills that would impress emergency medical professionals." She didn't panic, assessed the situation correctly, and executed the procedure perfectly. "Emma's always been exceptional in crisis situations," Sister Mary Catherine replied with pride that made Emma's chest warm. "She's helped us through several medical emergencies over the years." Jake knelt to Emma's eye level, his massive frame folding down with surprising grace. "Emma, is there anything I can do to thank you? Anything you need or want?" Emma looked at this intimidating man whose life she'd just saved, seeing past the leather and tattoos to someone who seemed genuinely grateful, rather than just politely obligated. "You don't have to thank me. Helping people is just what you're supposed to do." "Maybe. But not everyone would have had the courage to help someone like me." "Why wouldn't they?" Jake smiled at the innocent question that revealed Emma's blindness to the prejudices that might have made others hesitate to approach him. Because some people judge by appearance instead of need. That's silly. People are people. Yes, they are. You remember that, Emma Blake. After Jake left that evening, Emma thought little about the incident beyond the satisfaction of having helped someone who needed it. She'd performed first aid before, helping with scraped knees, minor cuts, and once assisting when Mrs. Peterson treated a volunteer's allergic reaction. Saving someone's life felt significant, but not life-changing. She had no way of knowing that Jake Morrison wasn't just any grateful stranger. He was president of the Phoenix chapter of the Hells Angels, a man whose word carried weight throughout the Southwest motorcycle community, whose loyalty was legendary among people who understood that some debts could never be repaid with money. Emma also couldn't have known that Jake had spent the drive home from St. Catherine's thinking about a 12-year-old girl who lived in an orphanage, but had shown more courage and compassion than most adults he'd encountered. Someone who'd risked herself to help a stranger without hesitation, who'd looked past his intimidating appearance to see someone who needed help. That night, Jake called an emergency meeting of his chapter, gathering 23 of the most dangerous men in Arizona to discuss something none of them had expected to address: how to properly thank a child who'd saved their president's life. "She's an orphan," Jake explained to his assembled brothers, his voice carrying the weight of obligation that transcended normal social boundaries. 12 years old, been at St. Catherine's since she was 5. Smart, brave, compassionate. She saved my life without thinking twice about it. "So we write a check to the orphanage," suggested Reaper, Jake's lieutenant. "Make a donation. Call it even." "This isn't about money," Jake replied. "This is about recognizing someone who saw past everything that makes people fear us and chose to help anyway. That kind of courage deserves more than financial gratitude." What Jake had in mind would require coordination with motorcycle clubs across multiple states, would involve resources and planning that most charitable organizations couldn't imagine, and would give one orphaned girl a demonstration of what happened when someone earned the loyalty of people who understood that some gifts could never be repaid. Emma Blake had saved a life with no expectation of reward. In 3 days, she would discover that some acts of kindness echo far beyond their immediate impact, creating ripples that transform entire communities and prove that angels sometimes wear leather jackets and ride Harley-Davidsons. 3 days after saving Jake Morrison's life, Emma was helping Sister Mary Catherine organize the orphanage's medical supplies when the rumble began. At first, it sounded like distant thunder, but the sky was clear, and the sound was growing steadily louder, with a mechanical rhythm that made the building's windows vibrate. "What is that noise?" asked Tommy, one of the younger children, pressing his face against the common room window. "Motorcycles," replied David, a 14-year-old whose street smarts had been honed before arriving at St. Catherine's. "A lot of them." Sister Mary Catherine moved to the window with growing concern. In her 20 years of running the orphanage, she'd dealt with various community situations, but the approaching sound suggested something unprecedented. "Children, please step away from the windows and gather in the main hall." But Emma couldn't resist looking outside, and what she saw made her gasp in amazement. Motorcycles were arriving from every direction, dozens of them, their riders wearing leather vests and moving with coordinated purpose. They formed neat lines in the orphanage's parking lot and surrounding streets, engines idling in mechanical harmony. "Sister," Emma called, her voice filled with wonder rather than fear. "You need to see this." Sister Mary Catherine approached the window cautiously, expecting to see the kind of motorcycle gathering that usually meant trouble for institutions like theirs. Instead, she witnessed something extraordinary. Nearly 100 bikers dismounting from their machines with disciplined precision, many carrying packages and wearing expressions of respectful purpose rather than intimidation. "Those are Hells Angels patches," David observed with the expertise of someone who'd grown up around street culture. "But they're not acting like they're here for trouble." The lead rider removed his helmet, revealing Jake Morrison's familiar face. He approached the orphanage's front entrance alone while his brothers remained in formation, a gesture of respect that Sister Mary Catherine recognized, even if she didn't fully understand its significance. "Sister Mary Catherine?" Jake asked when she answered the door, his voice carrying the careful courtesy of someone trying to make a good first impression despite his intimidating appearance. "My name is Jake Morrison. I was here 3 days ago when your young lady Emma saved my life. I remember." "Mr. Morrison, this is quite an impressive gathering you've brought." "Yes, ma'am. We're here because word has spread through the motorcycle community about Emma's courage and kindness. When bikers hear about someone who helps others without expecting anything in return, especially someone as young and brave as Emma, we take notice." Sister Mary Catherine studied Jake's face, seeing sincerity beneath the leather and tattoos. "What exactly are you proposing?" "We'd like to show our appreciation, if that's acceptable to you and Emma. We've brought some gifts for the orphanage and would like to spend time with the children, if you're comfortable with that." Behind Jake, the assembled bikers waited patiently, their discipline and organization suggesting this wasn't a spontaneous gathering, but a carefully planned operation. Sister Mary Catherine noticed that many were older men, some with gray hair, and lines that spoke of decades spent living hard but purposeful lives. "Emma?" Sister Mary Catherine called. "Could you come here, please?" Emma emerged from the hallway where she'd been listening with growing amazement. Seeing Jake again, surrounded by what looked like an army of leather-clad motorcyclists, she felt both excited and overwhelmed. "Hello, Mr. Morrison," Emma said politely. "Are all these people here because of what happened at dinner?" "They're here because word travels fast in our community when someone does something exceptional," Jake replied, kneeling to Emma's eye level. "Emma, these are my brothers from motorcycle clubs across Arizona, New Mexico, and California. They heard about what you did, and they wanted to meet the brave girl who helped someone without thinking about the risks." "I wasn't brave. I was just helping. That's exactly what makes it brave." What followed was unlike anything in St. Catherine's history. The bikers had coordinated a massive charitable effort that demonstrated organizational skills that rivaled military operations. They'd brought toys for every child in the orphanage, medical supplies that would last months, and funding for building improvements that Sister Mary Catherine had been dreaming about for years. "We also brought something special for Emma," Jake announced, gesturing toward a group of bikers who were wheeling a small motorcycle from one of the trailers. "It's not for riding yet, Emma's too young, but it's for learning. Maintenance, basic mechanics, understanding how machines work." The motorcycle was a vintage Honda that had been completely restored, painted in bright blue with Emma's name carefully detailed on the tank. It was beautiful, age-appropriate, and clearly represented hours of skilled work. "Mr. Morrison, this is too much," Sister Mary Catherine protested, though Emma's face was glowing with excitement. "Sister, with respect. This represents what our community values: courage, loyalty, and helping others. Emma demonstrated all three when she helped me. This is how we honor people who embody our principles." "Can I learn to work on it?" Emma asked, running her hands over the motorcycle's gleaming surface. "That's exactly what it's for, and we've arranged for instructors, experienced mechanics who'll teach you properly, safely, with full respect for Sister Mary Catherine's rules and schedules." The afternoon transformed into an impromptu festival as bikers interacted with orphan children who'd rarely experienced such focused attention from caring adults. These weren't the criminals that popular stereotypes suggested, but men and women who'd found family and purpose in brotherhood that transcended blood relationships. "Why did you really do this?" Sister Mary Catherine asked Jake as they watched Emma receive basic motorcycle maintenance lessons from a grizzled mechanic named Bear. Because Emma saw past appearances to help someone who needed it. In our world, that kind of character is rare and precious. We take care of people who take care of others. "And what happens now?" Now, Emma has an extended family she didn't know she needed, and we have a young lady who reminds us what we're supposed to stand for. As the sun set over Phoenix and the bikers prepared to depart, Emma understood that her simple act of helping a choking stranger had connected her to a community that valued the same things Sister Mary Catherine had taught her: loyalty, courage, and protecting people who needed protection. "Will I see you again?" Emma asked Jake as he prepared to leave. "Emma Blake, you've got 100 uncles now who'll be checking on you regularly. Your family." As the motorcycles departed in coordinated formation, Emma realized that helping others didn't just save lives. Sometimes it revealed that family could be found in the most unexpected places. Over the following months, Emma's life transformed in ways she'd never imagined possible. What had started as a simple act of helping someone in distress had evolved into something resembling an adoption by an entire motorcycle community that took their obligations to family seriously. Every Saturday morning, Bear Thompson arrived at St. Catherine's to teach Emma motorcycle maintenance in the garage space the orphanage had converted for automotive education. Bear was 62 years old, a Vietnam veteran whose gentle teaching style contrasted sharply with his intimidating appearance. "Today we're going to learn about carburetors," Bear announced, laying out tools with the precision of someone who'd spent decades working with machinery. Understanding how fuel and air mix is fundamental to understanding how engines work. Emma absorbed the lessons with enthusiasm that impressed even Sister Mary Catherine, who'd initially worried about the appropriateness of 12-year-old girls learning motorcycle mechanics. But watching Emma's confidence grow as she mastered complex concepts had convinced the nun that some gifts were worth embracing, regardless of their unconventional sources. Emma's showing aptitude that suggests genuine mechanical intelligence, Dr. Rodriguez observed during one of his volunteer visits. The way she grasps spatial relationships and cause and effect mechanics is exceptional for her age. "The bikers say she's got natural talent," Sister Mary Catherine replied, watching Emma successfully adjust carburetor settings under Bear's guidance. "They think she could have a career in automotive engineering if she wants it." The orphanage itself had been transformed by the motorcycle community's ongoing support. Beyond the initial gifts, the bikers had established what they called family maintenance, regular visits, funding for educational programs, and the kind of consistent adult attention that many of the children had never experienced. "Uncle Jake's here," announced Tommy, who'd appointed himself lookout for motorcycle arrivals. The title had emerged naturally as the children adapted to having dozens of leather-clad adults who took genuine interest in their education and well-being. Jake's weekly visits had become highlights of Emma's week. Unlike the formal interactions she'd known with most adults, Jake treated her as someone whose opinions mattered, whose interests deserved serious attention. "How's the mechanical education going?" Jake asked, settling onto the orphanage steps where Emma often studied after her lessons with Bear. "I can rebuild a carburetor now," Emma reported proudly. "And Bear says I understand electrical systems better than some adults he's taught." "That's good. Knowledge gives you options that other people can't take away." Emma studied Jake's weathered face, seeing past the intimidating exterior to someone who genuinely cared about her development. "Uncle Jake, why did you really organize all this?" "Just because I helped you when you were choking." Jake was quiet for a moment, choosing words carefully. "Emma, most people go through life without ever making a real difference in anyone else's existence. You made a difference when you were 12 years old, without thinking about rewards or recognition. That kind of character deserves nurturing. But there are lots of other kids here who are good people too. And we're helping them too. But you're the one who showed us that courage and compassion can exist in unexpected places. That lesson is worth more than whatever we've invested in supporting you." The conversation was interrupted by Sister Mary Catherine's announcement that Emma had received mail, a scholarship offer from Arizona State University's engineering program, contingent on maintaining academic performance through high school. "They're offering to cover full tuition, room and board," Sister Mary Catherine explained, her voice mixing excitement with disbelief. "The scholarship is funded by something called the Morrison Foundation." Emma looked at Jake, understanding immediately. You set this up. I set up the foundation. The scholarship offer is based on your actual academic performance and bears assessment of your mechanical aptitude. You earned this opportunity. But I'm only 12. The scholarship is for when you're ready for college. Until then, you've got support for everything you need to prepare for that opportunity. That evening, Emma sat in her dormitory room at St. Catherine's, looking at the scholarship paperwork that represented possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. Growing up in an orphanage had taught her to appreciate stability and modest hopes. But suddenly she was looking at a future that included higher education and career prospects that seemed almost impossibly bright. "You okay?" asked Sarah, her roommate, who'd been at the orphanage longer than anyone else. "I think my life just changed completely. Because of the bikers? Because of everything. 6 months ago, I was just another orphan who'd probably age out of the system with a high school diploma and hope for the best. Now I've got a scholarship to study engineering, mechanical skills that could lead to good jobs, and 100 adults who care about whether I succeed." "Are you scared?" Emma considered the question seriously. Change was always frightening, especially for children whose early lives had been defined by instability and loss. But this change felt different. Supported, planned, surrounded by people who were invested in positive outcomes. "I'm excited," Emma said finally. Scared too, but mostly excited. The next morning brought news that would test everyone's commitment to Emma's newly expanded future. A couple from California had expressed interest in adopting Emma, offering what many would consider an ideal family situation: suburban home, stable income, traditional nuclear family structure. "They seem like wonderful people," Sister Mary Catherine explained during a meeting that included Emma, Jake, and the social worker handling the case. Professional backgrounds, no other children, specifically interested in adopting an older child with Emma's intelligence and maturity. "What does Emma want?" Jake asked, his voice carefully neutral despite his obvious concern about losing the girl who'd become central to his foundation's mission. "I want to understand my options," Emma replied with a thoughtfulness that had impressed adults since she was small. "The Caldwells seem nice, and I know traditional families are supposed to be better for children." "But," Sister Mary Catherine prompted, sensing Emma's hesitation. "But I've got something here that I've never had before. Real relationships with people who chose to care about me because of who I am, not because they're supposed to. Uncle Jake and Bear and all the others. They're my family too." Jake leaned forward, his expression serious. "Emma, if you think a traditional family would give you advantages we can't provide, you should pursue that opportunity. Our support isn't conditional on you staying at St. Catherine's." "But would it continue if I was adopted by someone else?" "The scholarship would continue regardless. The mechanical education might be harder to arrange, depending on where you lived and how your adoptive parents felt about motorcycle communities." Emma realized she was facing the kind of choice that would define her entire future. Conventional stability with uncertain support for her developing interests, or unconventional family bonds that had proven their commitment but offered less traditional security. The decision would test everything she'd learned about courage, family, and choosing the future that honored who she was becoming, rather than who others expected her to be. The choice between traditional adoption and remaining at St. Catherine's with her motorcycle family became complicated when Emma discovered troubling information about the Caldwell family's motivations. What had initially seemed like a straightforward decision between conventional and unconventional family structures revealed deeper issues that made Emma question everything about the adoption process. "There's something you need to know about the Caldwells," David told Emma one evening, after overhearing a phone conversation between Sister Mary Catherine and the social worker. "They specifically requested a child with your background. Orphaned young, high academic achievement, no behavioral problems. That makes sense. They want a child who'll be successful." "Emma, they requested specifically an orphan with media attention. They mentioned the news stories about you saving the biker's life." The revelation hit Emma like a physical blow. The local news coverage of the orphanage's relationship with the motorcycle community had been generally positive, portraying Emma as a young heroine whose courage had bridged different worlds. But now it seemed that coverage had attracted attention for the wrong reasons. They want to adopt me because I'm famous. I think they want to adopt the girl who saved a Hells Angels president and got featured in heartwarming news stories. That's different from wanting to adopt Emma Blake. That night, Emma couldn't sleep as she processed the implications of David's information. She'd learned to be suspicious of adults whose interest in her seemed connected to external factors, rather than genuine care. But the Caldwells had presented themselves as people drawn to her intelligence and character. The next morning brought clarification that confirmed her worst fears. Jake arrived at the orphanage with information that his contacts had gathered about the Caldwell family's background and motivations. They run a family blog about overcoming adversity through faith and determination. Jake explained to Sister Mary Catherine and Emma during a private meeting. They've built a following by documenting their struggles with infertility and their journey toward adoption. That doesn't necessarily mean they're exploitative, Sister Mary Catherine pointed out, though her voice carried doubt. They've been documenting the adoption process online, including details about Emma's background and the circumstances that made her available for adoption. They're treating this like content creation, rather than family building. Emma felt sick as she understood how she'd been positioned in someone else's narrative. The photogenic orphan with an inspiring backstory who would provide compelling content for people building their brand around overcoming challenges. There's more, Jake continued grimly. They've been in contact with media outlets about documenting the adoption, potentially including a reality show about blending Emma's rough background with their wholesome family values. They want to put me on television? They want to monetize your story. Emma, you're not a child to them. You're a character in their public narrative about rescue and redemption. Sister Mary Catherine's expression grew cold as she processed the information. Have they actually filed adoption paperwork yet? That's where this gets complicated. They've retained a lawyer who specializes in what they call media-friendly adoptions, someone who helps families navigate the legal process while maximizing publicity opportunities. Emma realized with growing horror that her choice wasn't between traditional family stability and unconventional motorcycle community support. It was between exploitation disguised as rescue and authentic relationships that had proven themselves through consistent action. "What can we do?" Emma asked, her voice small, with the understanding that her autonomy in this situation was limited by her age and legal status. "We fight," Jake replied, with the certainty of someone accustomed to protecting what mattered. "But fighting requires understanding exactly what we're up against." The investigation that followed revealed a systematic operation where the Caldwells had adopted multiple children whose backgrounds provided compelling content for their various media platforms. Previous adoptions had been children with disabilities, trauma backgrounds, or circumstances that generated sympathy and engagement from their audience. They've essentially built a business model around adopting children with marketable stories, explained Sarah Chen, the journalist who'd originally covered Emma's relationship with the motorcycle community and had been investigating the Caldwells' background. Each adoption generates months of content, book deals, speaking engagements, and brand partnerships. What happens to the children once the novelty wears off? That's the disturbing part. Some are returned to the system when they stop generating engagement. Others are placed with relatives or other families when maintaining them becomes more expensive than profitable. Emma listened to these revelations with the sinking understanding that she'd almost become merchandise in someone else's marketing strategy. The warm family scenarios the Caldwells had described were performance rather than reality, designed to create content that monetized her trauma and recovery. The good news is that we have legal grounds to challenge the adoption, Jake announced after consulting with attorneys who specialized in protecting children's interests. But the bad news is that fighting this will require exposing Emma to exactly the kind of media attention the Caldwells want to exploit. What do you mean? We'll have to go public with evidence about the Caldwells' business model. That means Emma's story becomes even more public, which could attract other people with similar motivations. Sister Mary Catherine looked between Emma and Jake. seeing a child caught between competing adult agendas that all claim to serve her best interests. "Emma, what do you want to do?" "I want to stay here. I want to keep learning from Bear and Uncle Jake. I want to go to college with the scholarship they helped arrange. I want to be part of a family that chose me because of who I am, not because of what happened to me. Even if staying here means fighting people with more money and legal resources than we have. Especially then. Uncle Jake taught me that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds aren't good." Jake's expression grew fierce with protective determination. "Then we fight, all of us, together." As Emma realized that choosing her unconventional family would require battling people who saw children as content opportunities, she understood that courage sometimes meant defending the life you'd built, rather than just helping strangers who were choking. The motorcycle community that had embraced her was about to discover whether their loyalty could withstand legal challenges from people who'd turned child adoption into profitable entertainment. The legal battle that followed was unlike anything St. Catherine's Orphanage had ever faced. The Caldwells arrived with attorneys, media specialists, and a public relations strategy designed to paint the motorcycle community as inappropriate guardians for a vulnerable child, while positioning themselves as rescuers, offering proper family stability. "They're claiming that Emma has been brainwashed by dangerous criminals," Sister Mary Catherine reported after reviewing the Caldwells' latest legal filing. "They're arguing that her preference for staying at the orphanage represents Stockholm Syndrome, rather than genuine choice." Emma sat in the orphanage's conference room with Jake, Bear, and Sister Mary Catherine, processing legal documents that reduced her life to competing narratives about what constituted appropriate care for orphan children. "They've hired a child psychologist who specializes in cult deprogramming," Jake said grimly, reviewing reports that painted his foundation's support as manipulation disguised as generosity. "Someone who will testify that motorcycle communities inherently corrupt children through exposure to criminal culture." "That's ridiculous," Emma said, her voice carrying anger she rarely expressed. "Everyone knows Uncle Jake and Bear and the others have been nothing but supportive and educational. What we know doesn't matter if a judge believes expert testimony about the negative influence of motorcycle communities on child development." The Caldwells' strategy was sophisticated and well-funded. They documented Emma's transformation from quiet orphan to confident young mechanic, but reframed her growth as evidence of inappropriate influence rather than positive development. Her mechanical skills were presented as gender-inappropriate conditioning, her confidence as premature maturity forced by adult relationships. "Look at this," Sister Mary Catherine said, showing them a blog post the Caldwells had published about their adoption efforts. "They're describing Emma as a lost girl seduced by outlaw culture who needs proper family structure to overcome her traumatic bonding with dangerous father figures." Emma felt violated reading strangers describe her relationships and choices in terms that made her sound like a victim of manipulation, rather than someone capable of recognizing genuine care when she experienced it. "They're also claiming that the scholarship is evidence of financial coercion," Jake added, reading legal documents that twisted his foundation's support into something sinister. "Arguing that we're using educational opportunities to maintain control over Emma's future choices. What does our lawyer say about our chances? Honestly, not good. Family court judges typically favor traditional family structures over institutional care, especially when one side can afford expert witnesses and media campaigns, while the other side is an orphanage and a motorcycle club." The situation deteriorated further when the Caldwells' media strategy began generating national attention. News outlets picked up their story about fighting to rescue a young girl from biker influences, creating narrative momentum that portrayed Emma's choice as either brave independence or tragic confusion, depending on the outlet's editorial perspective. "This is getting out of hand," Bear observed, reading online comments that ranged from supportive to viciously critical of everyone involved. "People are taking sides based on stereotypes instead of facts." "That's exactly what the Caldwells want," Jake replied. "Public pressure that makes it politically impossible for a judge to rule against traditional family adoption in favor of motorcycle community guardianship." Emma watched her life become national news with growing dismay, Strangers debated her best interests without knowing anything about her actual experiences, relationships, or preferences. The motorcycle community that had embraced her was being demonized by people who'd never met them, while the Caldwells were praised for their dedication to child welfare, despite evidence of their exploitative business model. "I want to speak publicly," Emma announced during a strategy meeting with their legal team. "I want to tell people what really happened and who these people actually are." "Emma, that's exactly what the Caldwells want," Sister Mary Catherine cautioned. "More media attention, more content for their narrative about rescuing you from inappropriate influences. But people are making decisions about my life based on completely wrong information. Uncle Jake and Bear and everyone else are being described as criminals when they're the most honorable people I've ever known. And if you speak publicly, the Caldwell's psychologist will claim that your defense of us proves we've conditioned you to protect your captors." The legal hearing that would determine Emma's future was scheduled for the following week, but the Caldwell's media campaign had already shaped public opinion in ways that made objective evaluation nearly impossible. Local news coverage portrayed the case as a battle between wholesome family values and dangerous biker culture, with Emma caught in the middle. "There's something else," Jake said, during what felt like their final strategy meeting. "The Caldwells have offered a deal." "What kind of deal?" "They'll drop the adoption proceedings if we agree to end all contact with Emma and dissolve the foundation's support for her education." Emma felt ice form in her stomach as she understood the choice being presented: accept separation from everyone who'd become family to her, or continue fighting with increasingly poor odds of success. "They want to eliminate our influence while claiming credit for negotiating Emma's freedom from biker control," Sister Mary Catherine observed. "Win-win for their public narrative." "What happens to the other children here if we take that deal?" Emma asked. "What happens to all the support programs Uncle Jake's foundation created?" "The foundation would probably survive, but our relationship with St. Catherine's would be over. The Caldwells would claim victory over dangerous biker influences corrupting vulnerable children." Emma realized that accepting the deal would betray not just her own future, but the other children who'd benefited from the motorcycle community's genuine generosity. Her choice had expanded beyond personal preferences to represent broader questions about who deserved to define appropriate family relationships. "I won't take the deal," Emma said firmly. "Even if we lose the hearing, I won't agree to abandon the people who've proven they care about me." "Emma, losing the hearing means forced adoption by people who see you as content rather than family. Then we don't lose." As Emma prepared for a legal battle that would test everything she'd learned about courage, loyalty, and fighting for relationships that mattered, she realized that sometimes protecting the people you loved required risking everything you'd built with them. The hearing would determine whether authentic care could triumph over manufactured sentiment, whether judges could see past stereotypes to recognize genuine family bonds regardless of their unconventional structure. The family court hearing that would determine Emma's future took place on a gray Tuesday morning in Phoenix, with media vans lining the courthouse steps and protesters from both sides carrying signs that reduced complex human relationships to simple slogans. Emma sat between Sister Mary Catherine and Jake, wearing the simple blue dress that had been her best outfit since arriving at St. Catherine's 7 years earlier. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Hernandez," announced the bailiff as proceedings began, that would either validate Emma's choice of family or override her preferences in favor of traditional adoption structures. Judge Hernandez was a woman in her 50s, whose expression suggested someone accustomed to making difficult decisions about children's welfare. She'd reviewed all the documentation, expert testimony, and media coverage, but her focus was clearly on Emma herself, rather than the competing narratives surrounding her. "Emma Blake," Judge Hernandez said, addressing her directly, "I understand you have strong feelings about where you want to live and who you consider family. Before I hear from the attorneys, I'd like you to tell me, in your own words, what you want and why." Emma stood, feeling the weight of decision that would affect not just her future, but the precedent for how courts evaluated unconventional family relationships. "Your Honor, I want to stay at St. Catherine's Orphanage and continue my relationship with Jake Morrison's foundation and the motorcycle community that has supported my education and development. Can you explain why you prefer this arrangement over adoption by the Caldwell family? Because the people at St. Catherine's and the motorcycle community have proven they care about who I am and who I'm becoming, not what story I represent. They've supported my education, encouraged my interests, and treated me like family without asking for anything in return. And what concerns do you have about the Caldwells? Emma took a breath, knowing her next words would be crucial. Your Honor, I've learned that the Caldwells have built a business around adopting children with compelling stories and using those stories to create content for their media platforms. They're not interested in being my parents. They're interested in being my producers. The Caldwell's attorney immediately objected. Your Honor, this child has been coached to make these allegations by people who want to maintain inappropriate control over her life and education. I'll allow the child to continue, Judge Hernandez said firmly. Emma, do you feel that anyone has coached you or pressured you to say these things? No, Your Honor. I've seen the evidence myself. The Caldwells have documented their adoption planning process on their blog, including details about my background that they shouldn't know and plans for media coverage that would turn my life into entertainment. Judge Hernandez turned to the Caldwell's attorney. Counselor, how do you respond to these allegations? Your Honor, my clients are simply documenting their journey toward building a family, as many adoptive parents do. Their transparency about the challenges and rewards of adoption serves an educational purpose for other families considering similar paths. And the media partnerships. My clients believe that sharing their story could inspire other families to consider adopting older children with challenging backgrounds. Emma watched the legal maneuvering that reduced her life to competing interpretations of motivation and appropriateness, but Judge Hernandez seemed more interested in facts than narratives. I've reviewed the financial records for the Caldwell family's various media ventures, Judge Hernandez said, consulting documents that hadn't been part of the public proceedings. I've also reviewed the Morrison Foundation's educational support programs and their outcomes for children at St. Catherine's and other institutions. The judge's thorough preparation suggested she'd looked beyond the media coverage to examine actual evidence about both sides' track records with children. Emma, I want to ask you about your education and future plans. How has your current situation prepared you for adulthood? I've learned mechanical skills that could lead to career opportunities. I have a scholarship for engineering school, and I've been taught to think critically about problems and solutions. Most importantly, I've learned what healthy relationships look like. People who support your growth without trying to control your choices. And you believe you've learned these things through your relationships with the motorcycle community? Yes, Your Honor. Uncle Jake and Bear and the others have taught me that family means people who invest in your potential without expecting you to perform gratitude or provide content for their personal narratives. Judge Hernandez was quiet for several moments, reviewing notes and considering testimony that would set precedent for future cases involving unconventional family structures. I'm going to make a ruling that may be unusual, but I believe serves Emma's best interests while addressing the concerns raised by all parties, Judge Hernandez announced finally. Emma Blake will remain a ward of the state under the guardianship of St. Catherine's Orphanage until she reaches the age of 18. However, I'm also establishing a court-appointed special advocate to monitor her well-being and educational progress, ensuring that her current support system continues to serve her development appropriately. Emma felt relief flood through her as she understood that she'd won the right to remain with the family she'd chosen. Additionally, Judge Hernandez continued, I'm issuing a restraining order preventing the Caldwell family or their associates from contacting Emma Blake or using her image, name, or story in any media production without her express written consent once she reaches legal majority. Furthermore, I'm ordering an investigation into the Caldwell family's adoption practices and media monetization strategies, as evidence suggests patterns that may not serve children's best interests. The courtroom erupted in responses that ranged from celebration to outrage, but Emma focused on Judge Hernandez's final words to her personally. Emma, you've demonstrated remarkable maturity in advocating for yourself and making difficult choices about your future. Continue to value the relationships that support your growth. Pursue your education with the passion you've shown for learning, and remember that family is defined by love and commitment rather than legal documents or social conventions. As Emma left the courthouse surrounded by her chosen family of bikers, nuns, and friends who'd fought to preserve her right to define her own relationships, she understood that some choices created precedents that extended far beyond individual circumstances. She'd proven that unconventional families could provide everything children needed to thrive, that love and commitment mattered more than traditional structures, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought by 12-year-old girls with the courage to choose connection over convenience. 6 years later, Emma Blake stood at the graduation podium of Arizona State University's College of Engineering, delivering the valedictorian address to an audience that included judges, journalists, social workers, and a front row filled with leather-clad bikers who'd supported her journey from orphaned child to accomplished young woman. Excellence in engineering requires understanding that the strongest structures are built through careful attention to individual components and their relationships to the whole, Emma said, her voice carrying confidence that would have amazed anyone who'd known her as a shy 12-year-old. My education in this principle didn't begin in classrooms. It began when I learned that family, like engineering, succeeds when every member is valued for their unique contribution to collective strength. Jake Morrison, now in his 50s but still commanding respect as president of the Phoenix Hells Angels, watched with pride as the girl he'd helped nurture delivered wisdom that honored both her technical education and the unconventional family that had supported her development. Emma's speech is being broadcast live, Sister Mary Catherine whispered to Bear Thompson, who'd become the Morrison Foundation's chief instructor for automotive education programs. Children in orphanages across the country are watching someone who came from their circumstances achieve something they never thought possible. The foundation had evolved far beyond its original purpose of supporting Emma's education. It now operated technical training programs in 12 states, providing mechanical education to at-risk youth while demonstrating that motorcycle communities could serve broader social purposes than popular stereotypes suggested. We've got 47 kids graduating from various programs this year, Bear reported, consulting notes about foundation activities. Automotive technician certifications, motorcycle mechanic training, engineering prep programs. Emma's success opened doors for opportunities we never imagined when this started. After the ceremony, Emma found herself surrounded by reporters wanting to document the conclusion of a story that had captured national attention years earlier. But her focus was on the people who'd made her achievements possible through consistent support rather than media-friendly gestures. "Uncle Jake," Emma said, approaching the man who'd become the father figure she'd never had. "I have something for you." She handed him a leather portfolio containing documentation of her acceptance to MIT's graduate program in mechanical engineering, funded by a full scholarship she'd earned through academic excellence rather than charitable assistance. "You did this completely on your own merit," Jake said, reviewing credentials that reflected Emma's transformation from endangered child to accomplished adult. No foundation support, no special consideration, pure achievement. "I did this with the foundation you provided. Not financial foundation, but emotional and educational foundation that taught me to value excellence and integrity over convenience and compromise." Emma had become more than just a success story for unconventional family structures. She'd demonstrated that children could thrive when surrounded by adults who prioritized their development over social expectations, who valued their potential over their compliance. "What's next?" asked Sarah Chen, the journalist who'd covered Emma's story from its beginning and had written a book about alternative approaches to child welfare inspired by Emma's case. "Graduate school, then a career in automotive engineering with focus on sustainable transportation technology," Emma replied. "But also continuing work with the foundation to expand educational opportunities for other kids who need support outside traditional systems." "Any plans for traditional family life? Marriage? Children of your own?" Emma smiled at the question that suggested some people still didn't understand what she'd learned about family definition. "I plan to build relationships based on mutual respect and shared values, whether those relationships fit traditional models or not." My motorcycle family taught me that love and commitment matter more than social conventions. The reception that followed brought together people whose lives had been changed by Emma's story and the precedent her case had established. Social workers reported increased willingness to consider unconventional placement options for children who didn't thrive in traditional settings. Family court judges described new frameworks for evaluating what constituted appropriate family structures. Emma's case changed how we think about child welfare, explained Dr. Martinez, the child psychologist who testified on Emma's behalf during the custody hearing. We now understand that stability and support can exist in many forms, and that children's own preferences deserve serious consideration when those preferences are based on demonstrated care rather than manipulation. The Caldwells had quietly dissolved their adoption-focused media ventures after investigations revealed systematic exploitation of children's stories for commercial purposes. Several children had been returned to appropriate placements, while others had found genuine families through reformed adoption processes. "You know what's interesting?" Emma said to Jake as the reception wound down, and they found a quiet moment to reflect on the journey that had brought them to this celebration. "I used to think saving your life that night at dinner was the most important thing I'd ever do. And now? Now I understand that saving your life was just the beginning. What we built together, the foundation, the educational programs, the legal precedent that protects other children's right to choose their families, that's what really matters." Jake studied Emma's face, seeing the confident young woman who'd emerged from the frightened child he'd first met 7 years earlier. "What do you think Frank would say about all this?" he asked, referring to the orphanage's founder whose philosophy had shaped Emma's early development. "I think he'd say that the best investments are the ones that pay dividends across multiple generations." As Emma prepared to leave Phoenix for MIT, she carried with her more than just academic credentials. She carried proof that unconventional families could provide everything children needed to thrive, that support systems built on genuine care produced better outcomes than structures based on social expectations. The price was choosing uncertain love over guaranteed safety, Emma reflected during her final conversation with Sister Mary Catherine. The promise was discovering that some risks create opportunities that safe choices never could. And if you had to choose again, every time. Some gambles are worth taking because the alternative is accepting less than you deserve. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and stay for the next ride. As Emma's train carried her toward graduate school and a future built on the foundation of unconventional love, she understood that some saves echoed far beyond their immediate impact, creating ripples that transformed communities and proved that angels sometimes wore leather jackets and rode motorcycles into children's lives exactly when those children needed them most. Behind her, Phoenix glittered with possibilities for other children who would benefit from the precedent she'd helped establish. That family was defined by love and commitment, rather than legal documents or social conventions, and that sometimes the best parents were the ones who chose you because of who you were rather than who they needed you to become.